Let's try with Isaiah. The word that Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations shall stream to it. Many peoples shall come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord."
Our second reading tonight is from Matthew 24. But about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. So too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two will be in the field. One will be taken, and one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together. One will be taken, and one will be left. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this: if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let the house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour.
We're going to move some things around, and I know you're thinking, like, that makes it kind of weird in the room. Is it worth it? But let me work it. I'm going to put my sermon down, flip it, and reverse it. Okay, cool. So if nothing else lands, that was worth it all. Thanks for coming. A quick word of warning here. If you're not familiar with the term porch pirate, this is the phenomenon that surges this time of year around the sort of peak of online shopping season, where thieves will steal packages right off of your doorstep. So you may want to stay awake and understand, maybe not in the night, but in broad daylight. Stay awake and understand this. If you had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, you would have stayed awake and would not have let your porch be pirated. These are the words of God for the pirates of God. Some people are taking to putting their Goodwill stuff or their garbage or cat litter in cardboard boxes on their porch so that people that steal stuff sort of get theirs. We're in week 2 of an Apocalyptic Advent, which holds us in the tension of waiting and working, this week for peace. We talked last week about hope, this week for peace. And we said last week that apocalypse literally means to uncover, to reveal, and that it reveals things like injustice, patriarchy, white supremacy, xenophobia, homophobia. And it reveals that though they seem to be dominant powers, they're not ultimate powers. And so we've witnessed in our lifetime in the recent past apocalypses like the Black Lives Matter movement, like the Me Too movement, which reveal injustice for what it is. So waiting for peace is not passively waiting for a future out of our hands. It's not anxiously, sort of frenetically wringing our hands and clawing at a future of our making that is entirely our responsibility. It's kind of active waiting. Appropriate for the coming of Christ, the birth of God with us, and the humanity of God in us. And so if at the end of the sermon you're wondering, so is he saying we should wait for peace, or should we get to work and make peace? Good. You've heard the sermon. I will not have resolved it at the end because I'm preaching not the resolution of the tension, but the tension itself. This is an apocalyptic Advent. And if you're anything like me, in a season that invites us to be present to peace and at the same time to wait for peace, it can be hard to hold that tension of presence and anticipation. Because even if we're not whisked away into a Starbucks Christmas latte, red and white Target buzz, or an Amazon binge-buying capitalist consumer coma, we get pulled out of the moment. We get pulled backwards by memory. We get pulled forward by anticipation, even the anticipation we're supposed to have. So how do we stay present and wait? How do we work and leave space and time for Christ's peace, a peace that's somehow beyond us, present to us, promised through us, to unfold? Is it foolish for us to hope for peace? This is rhetorical because many people today would go, yeah, that's foolish. Like Matthew says, this peace might arrive at any moment. Peace on earth, goodwill toward humankind, like it might surprise us overnight. Some sort of a jolly humanitarian peace present, snuck down the desperate, disintegrating global chimney. When we take Isaiah seriously, actually I prefer Isaiah, about the days to come, do we wait? Do we wait for the days to come? Or do we get about the work of beating swords into plowshares today? What does it mean for the world we find ourselves in? Maybe a refugee caravan family finding hospitality and safety rather than tear gas and rejection. It can be hard today to stay present to this season, which is to say, it's hard to both be in the moment and to anticipate the moment to come. This is the paradox. It's the posture and it's the gift of apocalyptic literature, and this is why an apocalyptic Advent, I think, is exactly what we need right now. So if you're missing Mary and the baby Jesus, heartwarming shepherds, choirs of angels, I promise you, we will get to Christmas, and they will be there, as they always are. But we're not there yet, and we're not there yet. You know what I mean? We haven't wrestled with this tension long enough. We're tempted so often to just breeze by it. And I'm guilty of skipping this stuff because it's not Charlie Brown Christmas. It isn't easy to make meaningful. It doesn't feel like hot chocolate and crumpled gift wrap on the floor. Instead, this is sort of the deep track B-side to the Advent album. And even if it's not your thing at first, and like I said, it wasn't mine, it deserves a listen because there is some quality hidden here. And we begin Advent with Apocalypse because it reveals that as cute as they are, the story's bigger than shepherds and wise men back then. Because that vision of days to come, that moment that Isaiah envisions, is crashing backwards into the present, and it's possible to be present to and participate in that hoped-for future right now, so that we don't get stuck 2,000 years ago in Bethlehem, so that the spirit of peace can destabilize justice now and can comfort the afflicted now. We can see that Christianity has a mysterious relationship with time and anticipation because at the heart of the faith is a sense of history, presence, and longing. We have these longings and promises in the Hebrew prophets and the Psalms for a messianic arrival, which is to say the coming of Christ. We see this fulfilled at Christmas, the first coming of Christ. But this sense of presence and longing is so foundational to the human spiritual experience that even Jesus doesn't fully satisfy this ache, which is why the Christian tradition develops an anticipation of a second coming, hence the apocalyptic Advent. And as I said, I've never been a big fan of this stuff because of the way the church has abused it to fearmonger and manipulate. But it's actually starting to make sense to me a little bit more. It creates a posture of both reaching back to the coming of the Christ child and reaching forward to Christ coming again. And it's a way of practicing time that transcends and includes, which is a way of saying it makes the story bigger, it makes it more whole, it makes it more integrated, it's more dynamic, it's more human, and because of that, it's more relatable. And this is where hopeful waiting moves from expectation to expectancy. Expectancy is looking forward to things working out. Expectations are looking forward to things working out my way. You've ever had interesting conversations over Christmas or Thanksgiving dinner? Many times it's because we share different expectations and things aren't going my way. Expectations mine the Bible searching for answers, for details, for specifics, for predictable outcomes to which we can be attached, in which we sort of rest some security. It's what people do with Matthew's text to scare people into this bogus idea of the rapture. It's when people think they need to know, and they do know exactly what will happen and when it will happen in the future. Who's good and who's bad, the rewards and the punishment that the good and bad will get respectively. But expectancy is hopeful waiting that surrenders those outcomes. Another word for expectancy is non-attachment. It's a way in many religions of practicing present, to be in the moment now. And it's actually what Matthew says in his text. Christ's peace is coming, but nobody knows when, the day or the hour, including Christ. Jay was sharing at Occupy this week what's called in statistics probabilistic, which is, I love this phrase, likelihood without particularity. Which is beautiful. Likelihood without particularity. This is loosely held outcomes. It is evolutionary, it is unfolding, it is open, but it is still something that draws us, that pulls us, to which we can look forward. But expectancy isn't a closed system. Expectancy isn't about the certainty of faith. Expectancy is actually about the mystery of faith. And the Christian tradition phrases it like this to simplify the story. And I would say this is like, we had to boil down Christianity to an elevator pitch. This would be one of them. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. I don't want you to get bogged down here, because this is not a statement about literal metaphysical doctrines we have to buy into to be good for goodness sake or get on the nice list for heaven. It's more a statement about the nature of the cosmic Christ in relationship to our experience of presence and our experience of expectancy. So the reason we get this mystery in Advent with the apocalypse and the second coming stuff, I think is so that we can actually celebrate the whole story, a unified story. So we could equally phrase it like this: Christ was born, Christ is born, Christ will be born. Not three separate events, but a single, unified reality in which, even as we participate in the now, we participate also in the was, and we participate in the will be. Advent is an invitation to slow down enough that we can remain present to that mystery. Somehow calls us to remember the past, to anticipate the future, and even as we do these things, we neither get stuck in the was nor passively wish for the will be. Advent invites us to participate in the is, in the now. The apocalypse, the revelation, what is uncovered in Advent is, sure, Christ was and will be born, but as we figure out how to presently wait, Christ is born. This expectancy, this present waiting, this is what Isaiah speaks of. And he speaks of, in what is now our past, of a distant future like this. In the days to come, God shall judge between the nations. And this is clearly apocalyptic. There's some good judgment in there, but it's also very good news, because what is the result of that judgment? People miss this a lot with biblical literature. They think judgment is equivalent to wrath or equivalent to hatred, but the result of God's judgment in this text is peace. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and they ain't going to study war no more. Keep in mind, Isaiah wrote this when things were not going well for his people. He didn't write this at the peak of the economy. In peacetime. He's saying the story of God, the cosmic scope and arc of the coming peace of Christ is bigger. It is more than what is happening right now. So wait, and Matthew picks up on this call. Wait as if the day is near. Wait as if justice and peace might arrive like a thief in the night. Wait as if a pirate on your porch might take your Amazon Prime order, but they leave justice and peace in their place. The key, though, and we can believe all those things, and that's fine, but your awakeness, your attention to it, your mindfulness about it, are connected to your experience of it. So to anticipate the swords into plowshares world that is being revealed, that the layers of injustice are being peeled back and peace is being revealed, that layers of darkness are being uncovered and light is being revealed, that layers of distraction and indifference, absence and fear are being peeled away, and what is being revealed just might be presence and compassion and comfort and even courage. I think these apocalyptic texts are chosen for the Christian lectionary because they amplify the story of the baby. They remind us that God is born in Christ, and as the God, the ground of being is born in a child, as the sacred spirit and unsilenceable call are born in a baby back then, so are they born in us now. So will they be born in God's good world forever. The question is, can we stay present to them? Not just from Thanksgiving to December 26th. Can we stay present to them? This isn't an Advent calendar practice. This is Christianity. This is the life of faith, not relegating Advent to warm memories, but practicing, participating in Advent as an apocalyptic arrival now. Caitlin pointed out at Occupy, the ones Isaiah is speaking of and speaking to, these are people who already have swords, which I think we very often miss when we read this text. These are not peace-loving pacifists. These are warring tribal people who Isaiah says are choosing not just to put down their swords, but to transform their swords into instruments of peace. I think we tend to abuse not just Advent's call, but the Christian call. We abuse it in order to justify our passive indifference or our impotent desire to wait without doing anything or our apocalyptic fear of being revealed. What if people see me for who I really am? We go, well, I'll beat my swords into plowshares in the future when it's convenient. Or I can't beat my swords into plowshares or spears and pruning hooks because of what they did back then. But expectancy and presence and actively waiting for peace takes my instrument of violence and it transforms it now. Not justifying based on what was, nor procrastinating based on what one day you might be willing to do. Which begs the question, what is your instrument of violence? And what's a present way you could transform it now, in this season, today? It might be, I don't know all of you as well as I'd like to, it might be guns. It might be fists. Maybe you've literally got a sword. If so, that's pretty cool. But I would guess, in an educated, respectable, middle-class room like this, it's our words. Our instruments of violence are our words or our money, our time, our attention, our inattention, our selfishness, greed, lust, our unchecked appetites and how they get the better of us. Maybe it's our vehicles doing violence to the earth or our diets doing violence to our bodies, our consuming habits doing economic violence, our clothes, shoes, and food doing violence to exploited workers. Whatever it is, Advent asks us, as we wait for peace, to consider, what do we do now to transform these instruments of violence, not independent of Advent, but because we anticipate the arrival of peace. And so, of course, we participate in it. So how does expectancy about the coming of peace help you to make peace now? Normally we'd pause and discuss this in the room, but I'm going to leave that with the students. Do you need to transition now with them to roll out? Not right now. I've got about 10 minutes, which is almost as long as this is going to take. Okay. Are they awake back there? Yes. I hear the whispers. So I asked a minute ago, how do we stay present and wait? Because aren't we either about this moment or about the future? How do we do both? Why does Advent call us to both? Why does Apocalypse seem to straddle both? How come it can't just pick one and make it easy? And this may be an oversimplification, but it came to me in the title that we give Jesus this time of year, Prince of Peace. And I think the answer to this tension is that we let it grow up on purpose. Because I think sometimes we make Jesus a magic baby who, upon his birth, sends shockwaves across the globe that melt hearts and melt swords and make universal peace, and yet we know this isn't true, because we're here 2,000 years later and we don't have peace yet. And even if Jesus gets the title Prince of Peace as a baby, he has to grow into it. The peace that he makes, the peace of Christ which arrives, which is worked out, which is hard fought, is learned, it's inspired, it's practiced over time. He may arrive as the Prince of Peace by becoming the Prince of Peace over the course of his life, present moment by moment, and also shaped by the expectancy of God's reign of peace. And maybe this kind of growing up and becoming a certain kind of person, living in a particular way over time, is actually what Advent means when it calls us to wait. It's not a passive waiting that goes to bed indifferently, foolishly, and blindly accepts whatever will be. Porch pirates, come on, have your way. Instead, it's an active waiting that stays up and stays on watch and looks for an arrival, even participates in it. It grows up on purpose. And maybe the peace of Christ is born in us again at Christmas, but it takes us our lives to grow up into that peace. The Talmud, on which Jesus grew up and became the Prince of Peace, by the way, states it like this: do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. And I love how this holds the tension of time, of work and anticipation. You are not obligated to complete the work, as in the future, but also to complete the work, implying the work was started in the past. But neither are you free to abandon it, which is the call to be present and do the work now. I love this, because if we're honest with ourselves, action is easier than surrender. Action's easier than waiting. Expectancy requires that we loosen our grip on certainty and admit that there's a future beyond our control, created not by ourselves, nor even by our progressive ideas, nor even by our institutions, but by God, by the flow of the cosmic Christ, by whatever force, source, ground of being, unified field, or cosmic pull has spirited us thus far. It wasn't you. And so whatever made it possible, and more so beautiful for 13.8 billion years before you were born and before Jesus was born, by the way, Christ was, Christ is, Christ will be. So stay awake, pay attention, be mindful. Wait. Wait. But this goes against every Western individualistic message of self-propulsion and bootstrap success that we have ever heard, because it's our job to do it. But in Advent, we don't just allow for this. We don't just put up with it or manage around it. We actually celebrate this. We slow down and remind ourselves that our hope for peace is not in the Dow Jones or the housing market, but in the call of God that has arrived and transcended religions for as long as people have marked time, the call that came to Abraham and the prophets. Our hope for peace is not in the government, but in the interdependent ecosystem of human community that has heard the call together, that has preserved the call of the prophets and all the holy names of God, and paved the way for the call in our tradition of John the Baptist and Jesus and the early church saints and mystics. Our hope for peace is not in the nonprofit industrial complex, but in the scandalous promise that with God's help, we might actually learn how to love our neighbors as ourselves and even our enemies. So whatever we believe about the literal or metaphysical context in the ancient texts, we are people of a story. And it's a story that is told very simply like this: Christ was, Christ is, Christ will be. And in Advent, we stand with our heads raised, with expectancy, with one hand reaching back to the prophets, one hand reaching forward to the promise of Christ, a promise heard by Isaiah and then Jesus and then John in his Revelation and then Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a future of justice and peace on earth, goodwill towards all people. Because we stand with one hand reaching back and one hand reaching forward, we stand open in the present. And another word for open is vulnerable. Vulnerable to the moment. Vulnerable to arrival, whatever may come, and whenever it may come. Present and expectant. When we stand stretched by this story, remembering the promises of the prophets and filled with expectancy for the future, we can stand firmly in the reality of the present and participate in the creation of a future that is a dream larger than any of us. We can open ourselves to a story that is still being written in the lives and stories of our ancestors and our tradition, written on the tablets of our broken and healed hearts, written in the lives of our children and our children's children, in whose lifetime we pray, swords become plowshares, spears become pruning hooks, tanks become tractors, bombers are dropping rations for the hungry. Advent captivates us with a vision of peace worth waiting for. And it invites us to stay awake. Just another way of saying to be here now. Be here now. And not sitting on our hands, but participating in the peace that was and is and will be. Be present and aware and mindful. This is a special season where we intentionally focus on how memory, presence, and expectancy can touch and can be experienced now. In the practice of active waiting, we remember the ache of the prophets for Christ, and we remember the Christ present in Jesus. Christ was born. We're present to the apocalyptic Christ who arrives now in this moment, revealing injustice and the absence of peace as we are called to work for peace. Christ was born. Christ is born. And we wait, full of expectancy, that Christ will continue to be born, to come again in and through us, revealing peace, justice, love, and light, revealing the humanity of God with us. Christ will be born. This is a special season, but it's also the familiar posture that we bring to this table each week. Memory, presence, and expectancy. We remember Jesus. Meaning that as we do it, we don't leave here and go back there. Instead, we bring the real presence of Christ here now to be participated in this present moment. We stand present to one another with arms open, vulnerable. We look at each other. We listen to each other because the open table requires presence. And we practice expectancy, which make the body broken and the blood shed apocalyptic symbols, which remind us that the Christ that was and will be, the peace longed for back then and hoped for in God's bright future, is already somehow mysteriously present with us and to us now. And so we remember, we work for hope, for the ways Christ will reside in our bodies and in our blood, as we embody for one another and for the world the humanity of God's peace. It is the table of this apocalyptic Advent, of this apocalyptic expectancy of and participation in peace. This is the table that has been set for us tonight. It is open to us, and it is open to all people. And no one will ever be turned away. As the students head to the back door to take off with Caitlin for Berryville and discussion, and the band comes up to get ready to play some music, why don't you all just take a moment as they transition, and then when you're ready, you can feel free to come and grab a piece of bread and dip it in the cup.